We've had some written questions submitted. We're obviously not going to have time to deal with all of them, but I've asked our three experts, and I think they've all reached that 23 years that David was talking about, so they're all officially experts. Who'd like to choose one and start on that?
Can you hear me okay? Is this on? This is from Maney. I mentioned a Swedish research about smoking, and a lot of Swedes use snuff. So would that be the same problem? Well, the answer to that, it has been investigated, and it isn't the same problem. There's no association between snuff exposure and autoimmune disease. So nicotine doesn't appear to play a part. So the hypothesis I'm working on is it's heavy metals in cigarette smoke that induce autoimmunity, or a B-cell mitogen called tobacco glycoprotein, and neither of those are in snuff. So what we think happens is that when you inhale cigarette smoke, then you get the development of lymphoid tissue in the lung that produces autoantibodies that then cross-react with joints, etc., and then induce disease. So the smoking story is relevant to rheumatoid and thyroid disease, Sjogren's disease. So many autoimmune conditions are associated with smoking because it might just upregulate the immune system per se.
Okay, somebody else like to choose a... Yes, Graham.
Here's one from Peter. My wife was diagnosed with lupus in 1992, although she had suffered with eye trouble in her 20s. 94, she had a stroke. 98, back in hospital with transverse myelitis, which you heard about earlier today. 3 years ago, her daughter was diagnosed with MS. There are so many similarities. How likely is this to be genetic, or is this still uncertain? And it's such an important question. You've got to be tested for all the autoantibodies here, actually. As I mentioned, it's one of the hardest differentials, the difference between MS and, speaking with a neurologist present, but between MS and antiphospholipid. And some of the features running through your family would do very well for sticky blood, which is treatable. So my advice would be to chase it up, make sure that all the lupus antibodies are done, read the booklets, go to Lupus UK and have her tested. We used to run a patients' meeting in St Thomas's every year, and sadly it's recently stopped, but I think we should go back to it. And we had a questionnaire of our patients once. We left on every seat a sheet of paper, and the question was, are you a patient with antiphospholipid syndrome, anonymously, and do you have a female relative with an autoimmune disease, i.e. thyroid, MS, lupus or rheumatoid? And interestingly, 60% of those with antiphospholipid came up positive family history compared with 20% of the controls. So I think the family history has just never been so important. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, and of course, because we don't really know what multiple sclerosis is, it's probably a conglomeration of diseases, and it's very important to check anyone who you think might have multiple sclerosis for other things that look like it, various arthritic diseases and so on. And that's how you turn up the occasional patient with something treatable. Right, this is a fairly general one, which I could probably start to deal with. Am I entitled to see a specialist in lupus, CTD, autoimmune condition, rather than, or in addition to, a very general rheumatologist? And I think the answer is you can ask to see whoever you like, and it's very important to get the help that is needed from the people that you trust. So the answer is to make the request really of the GP.
Would that be true in Wales?
Well, Wales we know is very different in health-wise it's very difficult in Wales.
To see who you want to see.
Yes.
Yeah, we can't use our bus passes anyhow.
Yeah, use your bus pass to get from Wales. Did either of the other two want to comment on that one?
I appreciate that question because it's easy to say, ask for another opinion, but it's very difficult faced with a GP who won't agree. It is a hard one. I think get the help of Lupus UK, for instance, and see somebody who they know. And that's one of the big things that Lupus UK has done, and that is a national grid of doctors who deal with lupus. And I think, I mean, I'm probably the shyest person when it comes to seeing anyone, but I fully appreciate what it's like being confronted with a GP having waited 2 weeks to get an appointment. But push, push, push.
David, would you like to do that?
There's a question here. It says, is rheumatoid arthritis linked to Parkinson's disease? And the answer to this, I believe, is yes. It's something that I'm actively following up. But when they do case control studies looking at various associations between rheumatoid arthritis and diseases, what's often forgotten is there's a big group of patients who've got very strong environmental risks for disease. I believe they need to be excluded. So if you look at patients who've never smoked with rheumatoid arthritis, then there does appear to be an increased prevalence of Parkinson's disease, and there's all kinds of diseases that appear to crop up in association with rheumatoid arthritis, and it's something I'm hoping to publish on. And those diseases are all to do with misfolding of rogue genes. So, for example, in Parkinson's disease, although the end stage of the disease is a process in the brain, actually the skin fibroblasts misbehave and don't fold proteins properly. So the misfolding of proteins is thought to put stress on cells, which then express these funny proteins, citrinated antigens, which then act as a source of the autoantibodies in rheumatoid arthritis. So when you have cellular stress, whether it's because you smoke too much, you inhale too much dust at work, etc., or you've got a genetic illness that makes you misfold proteins anyway, then all of those things will predispose generally to conditions, autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis. So I do believe there is a link.
Either of you want to comment on that one? Okay. Would you like to?
Yes, the trouble is working out the correlation, isn't it? Without in any way disagreeing about something I don't know much about, misfolding of proteins. The fact of the matter, I suppose, is why does that process affect certain aspects of body behaviour and not others, certain systems and not others? And therein lies the challenge of continued research, to try to find out why A leads to B and B leads to C, and so on. The lawyers say, don't they, that subsequence is not necessarily consequence. In other words, because A follows B, it doesn't mean that A follows B. And that's where the statistics of research are so important, of course, as you're hinting at, David.
Yes.
I've had a request for a quick comment from somebody in the audience.
Sorry, just a quick comment. You're talking about smoking. Sorry, dry mouth.
That's
Sorry,
smoking.
primary Sjogren's. You talk about smoking. Is this secondary smoking, or do you have to sort of sit on top of the cigarettes?
When it comes to women, generally there's a much greater susceptibility to autoimmune per se. So what I'm interested in is, for example, the pathogenesis of rheumatoid, and the men really have to go out of their way to get rheumatoid arthritis, so most are double exposed. Whereas some of the women, as you rightly say, have had the misfortune to work in environments where there is passive smoke. So we now know what the baseline rheumatoid factor is for someone who's never smoked, who's a female, and has had no environmental exposures to speak of, and that average rheumatoid factor is 20. And it's noteworthy that the patients we've collected so far have worked in bookies, worked in bingo halls, worked in dance halls, etc., who have never smoked, then their average rheumatoid factors are about 250. So there's a huge difference. So we think passive smoking in women where susceptibility appears to be different, does play an important role.
Thank you.
Would you like to choose another question?
This is from a patient. Is there other medication for treating Sjogren's and fibromyalgia apart from antimalarials? Because they don't agree with me. That's a question which is very important because there's not an easy answer. We've got one level, which is Plaquenil, brilliant drug, good for fibromyalgia, good for fatigue. But if you don't respond to that, then there's a huge gap. You know, you're talking about occasional steroids, or even one of the new biologics has been pushed for Sjogren's, but that's a cost-effective drug we don't know even yet. Are you, whoever asked the question, the dose matters? Yes, the dose matters. Is it Plaquenil and one a day? 2 a day is too much. 2 a day makes you sick, nausea. And all GP, I shouldn't say this, but a lot of doctors give 2 a day as a standard dose. We find patients, because it's got a long half-life, can get away with mostly 1 a day, but in some patients 3 a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And that gives you a nice level of less fatigue.
Christopher, would like to do another question?
Yeah, well, there's one here saying during the diagnosis stage, what steps can you take to make daily living easier? And that's a matter, therefore, of limiting symptoms, isn't it? Because it's during the diagnosis stage, it's before any specific treatment might be considered. And that's where organising how to cope with fatigue, having the help of physiotherapy, help of occupational therapy. Some people feel clinical psychology is helpful in those areas. It's a matter of trying to invoke the services of that sort. And most general practices now have some access to those, what we might call paramedical sort of services. There's a question though about discoid and not SLE, and that would be, Graham, something that you could deal with.
Discoid lupus we teach, and it's in the medical textbooks, that it's 5%, I think, of discoids can get systemic. I mean, it obviously varies where that data comes from. But the bottom line is that systemic features, mild systemic features in discoid are quite common. Patients get fatigue, aches and pains, some of the things you get in generalized lupus. And we always go for low-dose antimalarials in those patients. I said in the last question that it's a difficult one because when Plaquenil doesn't do the job, there's very little else at the moment. It's a big gaping hole there at the moment. Yeah, go to the lower dose then.
Another question, gentlemen?
Yeah, there's a question here that I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer, but it says stem cell and gene therapy, could there be a cure or better treatment for SLE? And I'm afraid I'm not aware of any data on that. I don't know whether Professor Hughes is aware of any data, but I do know there is quite a significant morbidity and mortality associated with stem cell transplantation. But
yeah. No, sadly, there's no good answer to that at the moment in this country. There's people who have been working in stem cell centres, lupus. There is an anecdotal literature, but we're not yet there, and I think at the moment it's very disappointing.
A couple more questions, gentlemen?
Here's one from Tracy. Why do I bruise so easily with lupus, and is there anything I can do to make them go away more quickly? And I suffer from migraines, and my worry, do not see them as being related to, somebody doesn't see them as being related to lupus. Could you clarify this? What is brain fog and what causes it? Well, I hope I told you in the talk, actually, but definitely, that combination of things, you should test for sticky blood. It can cause the platelets to be low. Instead of 150, it could be 90, and that causes you to breathe. If you've ever had steroids, those of you who know how badly you bruise on those, there are different reasons. But they're suspicious that there's, blood is sticky there, and it may be that a baby aspirin every day, or if you're aspirin sensitive, a Plavix every day.
One more question, gentlemen.
There's something here. What are the latest accurate UK figures for lupus incidence? Rare, common, unusual, overlooked. An actual epidemic in UK, query mark. Well, Graham's given us figures, but I suppose this is a matter of ascertainment too. The more something is known, the more likely it is to be diagnosed, and also the more likely to be misdiagnosed actually as well. So this is a problem with all new disease processes, not that this is that new. You look for things. It's the same really as having a new technique for investigation, such as, for example, MR scanning, which is now 20 years old, of course. You use it for everybody, you find out eventually what it's useful for, and then you hone down the uses to which you put it. So it is ascertainment in part.
Yes.
How do you detect these things? But Graham, do you have further comment on that?
Absolutely agree. I think what's come out, in my mind anyway, is the importance of the family history. Women go for their first pregnancy visit to the midwife or to the doctor, and they have a past history of a miscarriage. They don't get tested because the boffins have told us that you need 3 miscarriages before you should be tested. And that's terrible. I mean, it's for economic reasons because there's many causes of miscarriage and so on. But I propose that 3 simple questions, which are, do you have migraine? Have you had a clot? You've got a family history of autoimmune diseases, which are like thyroid. It should be tested, and maybe one day we'll get that far.